And Gabi, of course, Nick, I think is going to be coming on, but Gabi usually spends most of its ad budget on digital platforms like Facebook and Google. But when the crisis forced a lot of traditional TV advertisers to cancel their ads, their campaigns, it really opened up opportunities to test TV to digital first advertisers like Gabi. And of course, Nick took full advantage of that, and he took the risk, and he ended up really investing the lion's share of his marketing budget into TV. So Nick, welcome. I want to I mean, well, first, before we even get into that, I see you're looking all refreshed. Where are you?
I am in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And so maybe as I close, I'll show you a picture from the balcony, but it's not such a bad place to be today.
Yeah, definitely. And I really appreciate you. I mean, when we made this plan, I didn't realize he was going to be in Mexico, and that is a trooper. You are definitely a trooper, Nick, being here with us.
Don't worry, my boss took advantage of me being online, and I've been working all day. So it's good because I can get caught up and then totally check out tomorrow moving forward.
And we all ate you, by the way, as well. But other than that, that's okay. So, well, anyway, Nick, just to get started here, I mean, as I sort of mentioned, you took that risk to invest in TV. It's something you hadn't done before. And hey, there's a pandemic going on right now, so it's not necessarily the time to take chances. So what made you do that?
Well, actually, Gabi spent more on television than I had felt made sense for percent of total spend at the stage of company we're at. We're a Series B company in the 10 million annual, revenue range. And usually, the Facebook is king. Every startup I've been at is obviously you start digital and then you try to grow. And so one of the big things for us was actually, how do we pull back on our dependency on TV, actually. And granted, the TV program, I think about TV in a couple different phases for a D2C startup, right? There's that incubation, initial, really direct response, buying untracked networks and kind of getting, the high quintile viewers, so to speak, and then the evolution into reach. We were still in that very kind of tight space where you're hitting that same 30 million people that tend to watch a lot of linear television, buying remnant stuff. And so I remember the board meeting in early January saying, hey, okay, great. And I was new to the company, and it was, Nick, build your team out and let's diversify and kind of grow our channel mix. And so actually one of the things I signed up for was reduce the dependency on television, which is something that I'd never written down at a startup at this size. And so for us, it was about how do you really expand the portfolio? And we started doing that. And I kind of held my team accountable for only spending X% of the budget on TV, even if it was really efficient, to prove to ourselves that we could scale our total portfolio. And also, what we were focused on within TV was the stuff that works when you're early in a TV campaign. News networks, not untracked stuff like I'd mentioned, and national locals. If you guys are familiar what national locals are, is when you buy a national spot and roll the dice and pay about 20% and hope that the local market doesn't buy it. That is a beautiful strategy, but it can bite you in the rear, which I'll talk to you about later, and also something that's just not scalable or sustainable. So the long story short was, from the fourth quarter to the fourth quarter, the idea was shift out of news, broaden your network mix, and also hold as a percent of your buy the television number. And then obviously
COVID.
The pandemic hit, right? And it wasn't about us not launching these other channels. It was about, we saw some tailwinds around a couple things that I'm sure some of you had seen when you were working in the space, right? We saw the CPMs drop out. We saw our response rate increase dramatically, right? We are a comparison engine for home and auto insurance. We help you find money on your existing coverage. In a unclear economic environment, we were topically relevant. And I'll talk about it in our session later around, I tested new creative to try not to be tone deaf and make sure that we were being thoughtful. And it turns out our very, functional basic creative of, here's why we started Gabi, you're overpaying and you should use this tool, ended up working really well for us. But the high level is we were going to evolve out of those local nationals, right? So it's a great strategy, but it doesn't scale. We were going to reduce the TV dependency. And then obviously local dropped out. In our local national spots, we were paying 20, 30% to get 90% of the impressions. And then the CPMs dropped out nationally. And so we were able to buy things that we would have never been able to buy, that to me would have been like year 2 of your TV life cycle, right? Buying primetime ABC Friday night type programs. And it was opportunistic. There was this beautiful disaster of, we were all stuck at home and we all were watching a lot more TV. And even while we were working, we had the TVs on. Then we had advertisers fall out because of everything that happened in certain industries that got hurt and hit really hard. And so it was this storm of everything's so much cheaper, but viewership is so much higher. And so I called a meeting with the board members and said, I hate to say it, but I need to pull back from my initial plan. And I think I might spend close to 50% of my budget on television. It's super uncomfortable, but it's working. And we saw like a 40% cost per visit improvement throughout, I think, March through till about June. And then I'll tell you about what happened in June shortly and how I got caught a little bit with my pants down, and kind of agility matters, right? But, that's the high level.
Testing these though, as far as now, because you talked about, you had to change creative, and how are you testing it? What KPIs were you looking at to know, all right, this is working for me. Let's keep investing. Let's keep putting more money into this.
Yeah. So I look at a couple different variables, and I think I'd say I use science and then, polish it off with art, right? So it's the normal kind of television attribution of how many people came to your site incrementally off of that kind of spot window, very direct response measurement. Then looking at kind of my reach numbers, right? What's my reach and frequency for the week based on where I'm buying? And then I use some of the how did you hear about us survey data to kind of triangulate kind of lift. From a creative performance perspective, I look strictly at kind of response rates on tracked networks. Within the window of that spot airing, how high was your response rate off of that creative? And typically in a direct response program, you have to be really thoughtful of, just like any digital program, you can't have too many variables in testing, right? Testing networks, testing day parts, testing creatives, et cetera, and so forth. And you had to have a certain, risk tolerance and a risk profile. What we were able to do with COVID is, because the performance was so strong, I could test 10 things at the same time and still have better than ever performance on my cost per, like my return on my investment in television. So, like I said, I reverted the plans back and said, don't really worry about the cap, because we don't know when these tailwinds will stop, right? We don't know what the future looks like. So let's, make sure people know that this is a service available to them, and use the medium that is efficient and available to us. So we grew faster than planned, obviously, like some folks, right? We didn't know it was around the corner. We tested a lot of new creatives, like I said. We went from 10 core networks to about 46 networks in 3 months, right? So that was because inventory was available. We had higher response rates, pricing was reduced, and we were just at places we wouldn't normally be. For instance, Food Network, Bravo, Discovery, places that are typically more reach-based and higher CPMs to compete when you're a small startup. But we were able to get in and learn. And for me, it's all a math exercise, right? Of, okay, it was at this CPM. All right, if we took a leap of faith, in the future, we could probably pay X CPM, and got some data points. And so essentially my team built this big grid of data that says, of broadcast and streaming and network, of the CPMs, how did we do on response rate? And then try to build in a creative variable. So now, as I'm going into an election month, right? This is in my opinion, this is what I've been telling my CEO. So hopefully you guys can back. I look like I know what I'm saying. Is this is probably the most competitive, difficult media time in the last 4 years, this month alone, because of what's happening November 8th. And because we're rebounding and people are coming back to the television market after COVID. And I was able to go and do non-preemptible deals. And for a startup that buys scatter remnant, to go do secured non-preemptible at 40 to 50% premiums to what I was paying, I would have never been able to do that if I didn't have all that game tape from what I was able to pull off in the testing period, right? So like I mentioned, we ran in broadcast, primetime, syndication, things like, America's Funniest Home Videos, Shark Tank, 90 Day Fiance. Some were ranges of success, right? Some things I took it on the chin, and some things didn't work at all. But I was able to kind of lean in and learn. We understood networks, day parts, shows, the CPMs that I mentioned. And for us, I've always been scared to go deeper into OTT. When you're a really direct response person, you get nervous because when you buy remnant television, it's $3 CPMs or whatever it is. OTT is more expensive. There's a fixed CPM, right? And then you want to add more targeting, it gets more expensive. But the age old saying of you pay for what you get, and sometimes paying more gets you more quality. You're nervous to do it, but we went into Hulu, Roku, direct places, like did a Viacom deal to test CBS different properties. We did Fox News, we did CNN Go. with all varies of learnings and different successes. And I think that accelerated me probably close to a year ahead of my schedule in being able to spend in those places and buy a $13 or $15 CPM campaign with these guys. Again, for me, it's all about the math equation of, okay, X% core, Y% test, Z% super test, or whatever you call it. And so I just built in the right threshold at the time, and I had the extra efficiency that I'd noted already.
Well,
Go
I just
ahead.
want to, I want to get to the crux of it because we don't
Yep.
have, unfortunately, I wish we had more time, but this is something that you, as you said, you took advantage of. You had all this data, then you were able to now in September invest in, I know you had told me earlier that you invested in Fox News and Primetime and spend the money because you know from your data that's worth that. We can't turn back time for those who didn't take advantage of that cheap, ad rate. How can someone today take advantage, do what you're doing, or is it too late for them? Is there something that they can do now moving forward to get that same advantage?
Yeah. I've been doing TV 15 years now and been doing startups for 10 years. And I used to think like there was a toolbox and way to execute. And after this experience, I realized that, the toolbox still works, but I think I put certain limitations on myself. Just because the inventory is 20% more expensive or more impacted doesn't mean that I couldn't do the exact same thing I did then. Now, maybe just less variables of testing and just really pushing myself to get out of my comfort zone to test. And I think a lot of marketers on this event get it, but you have to kind of get uncomfortable to grow. And if you do more of the same, it's not going to work. So an example could be go buy something that's very uncomfortable, like maybe it's a $12 streaming thing with Hulu, but understand your total budget, understand your total TV budget, right? The classic test versus core type of an approach. But make yourself a little bit more uncomfortable and learn, because what I was able to do in this period, like I said, was accelerate, I think, a couple of years in our learning journey. And so I think everyone can do it today. It's just understanding, do you have the right measurement in place? Do you believe in the right measurement you've got before you go do this? Because if you don't, you're wasting your time, right? And measurement is hard. We all know that. Well, if you feel like your measurement's right, then get the right partner on the TV side, and push them and push yourself to think about, how do I get to the next year, the evolution of my plan. And I'm customizing this portion of the discussion more for series A, B, and C type startups, right? If you're already a well-established spending, $50 million on television, it's different, but I think you could take the same approach, just different.
Well, and before I do have one more question, but I want to remind everyone, if you have questions for Nick, please raise your hand and someone will unmute you and then you can ask him yourself. But just from all of this, you as you said, you sort of started the year off one way, then you switched over. Where do you see yourself moving forward? What's your key takeaway at this point?
Yeah.
To go into next year?
Yeah, I mean, I learned television converts higher than most channels, and as I scaled it, it held. I learned that I can keep going and keep expanding. I learned that my response rate on streaming is 2x of what it is on linear, at least for my brand. And so that's helpful as I do this stuff. I learned that I can buy some of these reach places and scale the business and not risk performance if I build it in right. I learned that topical messaging really wins and that messaging matters. And I think the previous panel was just talking about it with 1-800-Flowers. Creative is half the battle. And I think you all know that. And being agile and testing it. I used to think creative was precious. I used to spend $2 million to make creative at Dollar Shave Club. Now I'm spending 20, 30, 50 grand and iterating real time using UGC. And so kind of, also, I learned that I can buy some of these guaranteed things to drive performance. A couple other things real quickly that I learned is don't get too comfortable. I got comfortable. March through May, television was amazing for us. And then June happened, markets opened up, stay-at-home orders opened up. The Black Lives Matters protests happened where viewership started to kind of normalize and people's attention span. And it was a disaster for me. It stopped working as well. And I couldn't move fast enough to deleverage it. And it went back to almost like, oh shoot, dust off the Q1 plan of diversification and lowering your tolerance or your dependency. Which is, that's what I should be doing as a marketer. I got comfortable, right? The other is over frequency. When you use a strategy like this and you're buying national locals and you're buying all this stuff, I'm pissing a lot of people off because you're watching CNN and you don't know that I bought the local spot and then I got the national spot, and then you flip over to ESPN and you saw me, and I'm running this very direct response creative of, hey, this is why we created this thing. It's here for you. You should try it. We pissed people off. We first had my German founder with his accent, and we started getting really, really strong negative emails about his accent and too much. I hate your commercials. And he was convinced that the formula worked. He said, Nick, go be in the commercial. You're a native English speaker. And so I put myself in the commercial, and it worked 30-40% better. And guess what? 4 months in, now I'm getting emails. I hate Nick. I don't want to hear his voice anymore, right? And so a good learning is like amazing visibility, but be careful, right? Because there's that moment of just too many times is when your advocates turn into your detractors, right? With the creative fatigue. And another learning, like I said, was that high cost production. Like I'm done making $2 million spots. I've got to test and learn and rapid prototype. Another thing that happened, and then I'll stop talking, Lisa, I promise, was we ran into an issue with running on certain programming within Fox News. And I had a tweet storm, and I had a boycott of my brand because I was airing in a certain program that said some things that were not cool. From a racism standpoint. And so I learned a lot on a dependency, and that was on a top performing show, Tucker Carlson. Amazing performance. That audience really responds to me, but I had to make a conscious decision based on the business and, where we wanted to go and stay away from that show. And I got beat up by both sides, right? I was up 2 days in this kind of Twitter war room. Trying to make sure that we
Is he frozen for everyone?
Oh, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if it was just frozen for me or for everyone, so I was like waiting. I can hear you now. Are you good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You're still a little frozen, but we can hear you. Well, let's
Okay,
open it up. Steve, does anyone have any questions?
Yes, since you talked so much about testing, Nick, if you're still there, what percentage of your budget is placed into testing? Do you have
Can you hear me? Can you see me and hear me? Am I better?
We can hear you and see you now.
Okay, cool. That's a good question. I think about testing within television, and I think about testing on aggregate. I'm a little bit more bold with my test budget. And so I go, 20% test aggregate. It's a little bit scary, but I do a forecasting every month, like I'm sure all of us do, and kind of build the test. And I typically build my test in, probably sandbag it and make it more inefficient than I know it's going to be, to build a really ugly picture to protect myself, to not do the normal thing we all do as marketers. On the 15th of the month, say, ooh, that looks bad, cut it. And then you didn't get the learnings that you needed. So within television, I do about 80% core, and then I do about 10 or so percent retest of things that I had conviction in. And then I do 10% net new all test. And that's networks and day parts. And then I have the creative variable that I don't even think about in that framework. And I typically start creative on like 5 of my best places that I know work, bring it in at like 20% and see if those audiences respond. Give it a little bit of frequency, because we all know frequency matters before you can pull the plug.
What have you, finally, what have you learned about context? You mentioned the Tucker Carlson problem, but beyond that, beyond just controversial content, what have you learned about the impact and the value of context in all of this? Since you're a performance marketer, you're so preoccupied with data-driven, audience-centric marketing. Tell us about context.
What do you mean by context? Meaning like the shows I'm in or the content, right? Content. Yeah, I think I've always been that marketer that thinks about this stuff. I was the brand guy at Dollar Shave, and then I was the performance guy before that. And so for me, I think I always straddle art and science and pay attention to it. But sometimes I get excited and turn a blind eye to the context, right? By design. My perspective on insurance shopping marketplace is bipartisan, it's impartial. Anyone that has a right or a left view should be able to save money on their insurance. But there's a line. Me playing dumb and putting my head in the sand and ignoring, the values of my company and the values that my employees hold, is dangerous, right? And so for me, I have to pay attention to it. I'll be honest with you. I ran today in a podcast, a conservative podcast, that is just giving me my best day I've ever seen. But there was some content in that podcast that was really, really negative against one of the candidates. And it's fine, but it's also, in retrospect, after the Tucker Carlson thing, I go, ooh, if I could make that decision again, I would turn those signups back to not be associated with such controversy, because I think there's a way for me to grow my business and make people aware of what I do, but also kind of mind the values of the business and the company and try to stay where we want to stay. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Nick, thanks so much.
Thank you, Nick. And
Now it's time to hit the beach.
where's the sun? Where's the sun?
Oh, here, you guys ready for the quick view here? Hold on.
Uh-oh.
You ready for it? All right.
Oh, damn. Oh, man.